Good. Welcome to the next session on IPCP, our coaching pathway. The next one is running now in February 27 next year. These videos to support you in understanding why you should be joining that. So this evening or last night, Jay ran a session and we ran into the coach's cognitive biases. So we're going to explore slightly that with the Headley and see how that is valuable and necessary for you to be across. Any questions that you have about the coaching pathway, when this video gets posted, put them in the comments and then Jay or I will respond directly to you. So Jay, cognitive biases from the coach perspective, what are you discovering?
Not so much what I'm discovering. I've known that the coach needs to do the work to get their stuff out the way. Otherwise, that's going to get projected upon the client. What the cohort is really starting to realize is how prevalent that is without the work. It's a bit like trying to understand a book by reading the first chapter. You can't understand the whole book. You can't go deeply into it. So a lot of coaches think they know themselves. And some of these coaches have been through practitioner, master practitioner, and they've done the old meta coaching with us, coming into this program now, starting to realize, holy crap, my biases are quite large, and I can now actually see how they're getting in the way of me being an effective coach, an effective developmental coach.
Okay.
And so last night we explored your thinking preferences, and we explored your work preferences. And so thinking preferences are, I think we're looking at, do you think in terms of, well, your work preferences are, do you prefer working by yourself or in a team with others? And the important part about that is shared responsibility. Do you like to hold responsibility yourself? Even though you like working with people, then you're likely a group worker than a team worker. If you like working with people and sharing responsibility, then you're definitely a team worker. And if you like to hold responsibility to yourself and you prefer to get things done on your own, then you're definitely individual. And so, we had lots of people who were team oriented, and lots of people who are extremely independent, individual oriented. Well, that's not really going to work for coaching. And as we explored that, people's faces and chins begin to drop, because it's like, oh, that's really getting in my way. I like to have responsibility. I don't like it to be shared between the client and myself. Well, that's going to facilitate over responsibility 101. And so the coach is going to start being responsible for the client. They're going to start thinking about what the client wants, how they want it. Am I delivering it? All that stuff's going to be going through their head time and time again. In the thinking,
let's interrupt the monologue. So, what's a cognitive bias, and what's showing up? Enjoy a smile. And how is that different to it just being a cognitive intention? What's the variable?
So it becomes a bias when it becomes a driver. And so it becomes a driver when there's a high score in one or both of the cognitive intentions, or if there are 3 cognitive intentions in a category, then across all 3. Then the category becomes a bias. Then it's a cognitive category bias, which is off the scale. Then it's part of your identity. It's part of your personality structure at that point.
Oh, so hold on. Say more about off the scale. It's off the scale in terms of.
So an example in perspectives. One person in the group had 90% first person, 95% second person, 100% third person.
Right.
That means that perspectives are now part of their identity. I said, tell me about how perspectives are part of your identity. She said, all I talk about is perspectives. I live, I dream, I think about perspectives. I'm constantly correcting people's language. It's like it's part of her identity. That's why it's so strong across the category. So the whole category becomes a driver.
How does that play out as a bias for that student particularly, without going into who that was?
Because they'll be constantly just coming back to perspectives. They won't be referencing anything else other than perspectives. They won't be referencing cognitive biases. They won't be referencing beliefs. They won't be referencing values. They'll just go, this is a perspective problem, because that's all there is. It's like tunnel vision. so, suddenly, well, that's your perspective, in his or her relationships, primary relationships. Well, that's your perspective, sweetheart. It's not my perspective. Can you hear how subjective that is? They're getting into arguments over whose perspective it is because it's part of the identity structure now.
Yeah. And so the bias is what, though?
The bias is a category bias.
Right.
Yeah. Whereas if a person had a bias for second person perspective and their score in second person perspective was 60% and their score in first and third person perspective, let's say, was 25-30%, then second person perspective becomes a driver. Therefore referencing what you think other people are thinking and referencing what you think other people are feeling becomes a driver bias for you.
Sure. Good. Okay. And what to do, and how is the course helping with that for the student?
As we go deeply into each of the biases, the students are seeing not only how the bias runs for them, but we're having individual and collective coaching conversations where everybody's invited into the process. So I'll coach somebody to their bias by asking, what's the positive intention of the bias? How does it serve you? How does it not serve you? Really simple questions. As you sit back, do you have permission to be able to expand your thinking to include the other perspectives, to include the other views within that category? Stuff like that. But then we'll slow it down and we'll go, what question would you ask here across the cohort? If you were this person, what's coming up for you? Who else has this bias? Right, what's coming up for you as I'm asking Bob these questions? What's coming up for you? 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 And they're sharing, and that person who I'm coaching then's going, that's exactly what's happening for me. Oh my God, what that person said. And so we're collectively learning off, like in a group and team coaching experience, about these biases and how they play out, not only for the person who's being coached or the people who are involved, but also my partner does that. Oh my God, my partner says I do that. So awareness of these biases, unless you're aware of them, you're going to be projecting them onto your client unconsciously, which means you're outside of your awareness, and it seems as though you're being unbiased. But your thinking patterns are directing the very fabric of your thinking, and therefore the fabric of the experience of the coachee who may not share those biases.
So what kind of coach can we expect to be coaching that isn't aware of these biases? What's the kind of quality? What's the likely outcome of the sessions with their clients?
Well, they'll have an unconscious agenda, Joseph. So they will hold an unconscious agenda to get somewhere. Let's say they had high achievement and high influence in terms of their success strategy. Yeah.
Right.
So high achievement means they want an outcome.
Yeah.
High influence means they want control and influence. If you had that bias and you weren't aware of it, you would be controlling the coaching session toward an outcome that was yours, not theirs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're not even going to know you're doing it.
Yeah.
And so I did it. A client once stood up at the end of a coaching session. He looked at me and he said, "Stop trying so fucking hard."
Right.
He left and never came back. It was the lesson for me that I was holding an agenda. It took me about 2 years to see it, but as I just held on to that, held on to it, it came to me like, that's what was going on. Here's me driving the session with my biases. That kind of thing's going to happen.
So as you can hear from our sharing here, we're very keen and we are very invested in making sure that as a coach, and particularly as an accredited coaching room coach, you're across a really clean, pure, and systemic approach to coaching. If that interests you, drop your questions in the comment section, or just really easy, come book on the course for next year, see Harriet. That's it from us. Till next time.